Anyway, for more serious stuff, I know that the Attorney General of the state of Alabama is like, I can't believe I come on this program. Steve Marshall is with me. Steve, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. I have not had, obviously, as much cup of coffee as you have this morning.
I've taken my performance-enhancing drugs this morning, and I am ready to roll. How are you?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me back.
Good, I appreciate it. You were doing work out there earlier, sitting in the parking lot, serving the people of the state of Alabama.
We were. Today, General Sessions held a meeting to discuss kind of what do we do with the Facebooks, Twitters, and Googles of the world. There's various complaints that are out there, one of which, I think you and I have talked about before, and that's kind of content suppression of conservative views on many of the social media platforms and whether or not there's an intentional effort to stifle open debate and discussion and having news, kind of like what you talked about earlier with some of the stories that get, buried that really speak the truth. There are some that would argue, and I don't know that I'm of this ilk, about really antitrust actions. I really believe in the market, and the market's able to
Well, is there a debate there? Because I've heard this, I don't understand, so I've got you here, and I want to ask. There's this whole discussion of, are they publishers or are they something else? And it sounds like they try to be something else on certain days, and they want protections on both sides, and I guess that's part of the argument. Have they gotten so big?
Yeah.
Are they really? Because I've noticed people. There's a former Hollywood guy. What is his name? I can't remember. But he tweets out something and gets banned from Twitter, and he gets his girlfriend to tweet the same thing out, and she doesn't get banned. So it's not the algorithm doing it, or the algorithm would catch me and you both, but it's specific people with saying specific things that get caught and thrown off and are penalized. So,
and I think that, part of what I think was left from the meeting today is there's still a lot to learn. Is it how do certain things happen? And exactly the example that you talked about, and others have pointed out to it as well, is it why can one person do something and it create an issue and others can't? Mm-hmm. And does there appear to be a bias within not only the algorithm themselves, but the corporate structure of a Google, a Facebook, or a Twitter? And so I think that's part of what's going on. But ultimately, from an antitrust side, we got to make sure that the consumer is the one that's protected.
Right.
That's really what that's about.
How does antitrust work? I mean, I know I guess it hasn't been done in a huge scale since maybe AT&T.
But you see, we had Microsoft. That was one that was done fairly recently, where the idea was that at that time Microsoft, when we all had desktops and there was no such thing as cell phones or they had, over 99% of the market. Basically, we were doing a Microsoft operating system, whatever that may have been. Read a really interesting article by Professor Bork.
Really?
Who would have been a great U.S. Supreme Court justice, but Bork.
So why did he get borked? By the way, did they just vote against him, or did they didn't dig up the kind of garbage they're digging up now? They just said we don't like you because you believe in the Constitution.
Ideology. They felt like that his discussion of free market and his philosophical views that he expressed as a professor and many of his writings were inconsistent with what folks
with their vision of this new democracy. I know you drive in and out, but I have this new theory, and frankly, the leader of the European Union said the same thing. He was bemoaning this new patriotism, this new nationalism that all these countries are basically saying, hey, look, it's our country, and we would prefer to do it our way. And so, of course, they're whining about that. And he said the same thing Democrats in this country say, which is, it's a threat to our democracy. Now, I have this theory that when they say something is a threat to our democracy, they are not meaning the same thing that you and I are thinking they mean.
They're clearly not saying a threat to our republic, by the way.
Yes, they should be, but they're not.
Exactly.
And so their democracy is this new socialist utopia thing that they haven't created yet, the transformational change of the United States. So they're telling us the truth. We're just not listening to what they're saying. And so Bork was going to be a threat to their democracy.
Clearly. And so Bork has written that, for example, with Google, that he doesn't believe that the same economic principles that applied to Microsoft apply to Google. And so I think there's an awful lot of thought that needs to take place about where we go. But if you think about, what many would invite in from the left would be additional regulation from government. Think about talk radio, for example. Back before Reagan's time, there was a requirement that radio provide equal time. In essence, what we do similarly to a campaign,
or at least an equal message. It didn't have to be perfect time, but it was an equal you had to have a balance of the opposite message, at least for a little bit.
And it was a disaster.
Right.
And we ultimately repealed that. And so to the extent that you have government dictating speech, obviously not only does it have constitutional implications, but also, it could be philosophically driven. I mean, I don't think we would want Barack Obama's administration to dictate to us what we could talk about or what we could say.
Right.
And so I think we have to be very careful if we're trying to encourage government regulation because, there's a saying among lawyers, bad facts make bad law. And we have to be very careful that we think the government can have the answers. One thing we do really well with the government is the military.
Right.
Other than that, we struggle. And so I think we have to be very careful that we don't create some new commission similar to the FTC or the FEC.
Right, that's deciding
to be able to
what
deal
is
with
hate
this.
speech, what is not hate speech. And I think most people just want the ability to have some sort of level playing field. And because so much news is disseminated through social media and the startup cost of something that could compete kind of keeps – it'd be like if you and I decided, okay, we don't like whichever big auto manufacturer and we're going to start up another one. I mean, the startup cost is just – it's impossible. You just can't get there from here. I think Tesla's going to prove that out when they go completely kaput. But and that's part of the argument is how much – control do they absolutely have? I mean, we control the airways with network TV. We still control Big Dave, not that I would use many bad words, but Big Dave has to make sure that I don't say certain things, and he has to do reports on what we talk about. So radio is monitored. Even though we don't have some of the things that were repealed during Reagan's time, it's still monitored.
Right.
And maybe just a little guidelines that says, hey, look, if you're publishing all this stuff, here's the basic guidelines.
Well, and I think the other area that is of interest to me more is what some of these large tech companies are doing with our data. And are they adequately disclosing to Scott Beason that when you log into whatever app,
right,
that here's what we're doing with the information we're gaining as a result of you using our particular application. And so, that is one that from the consumer protection side of the house, are we adequately advising consumers about what's going on with their information?
And if they could not do all that, their profitability would be gone.
Absolutely. I mean, they are monetizing mining your information.
Every single thing. And I love how they would like to claim, will you agree to it when you check that box, agree to my terms? I can't even, I get carpal tunnel syndrome swiping up to try, and I don't read it. No one reads it. It could say anything. We'll take your firstborn child, and we all put, I accept the terms.
Right.
And those contracts hold?
They can, because
it's amazing to me. Because if I was on a jury, I'd be like, I didn't read it. I talked to the person beside me. Did you read it? No, he didn't read it. There's no way we would vote
and
for
so
that.
Part of my focus would be how do we make that process more consumer friendly? And so I think that's a clear issue. But it's one that I think is going to divide philosophically some of my Republican colleagues away from what I think is a conservative approach. And so we'll see what that is. Sometimes
not all of our Republican colleagues are even sure what a conservative approach is. I mean,
well, we've seen on DACA and we've seen on other issues that we've been involved with as well. By the way, I think you've seen that we had at least an order come out initially from the judge in Texas that although he refused to grant the preliminary injunction, he did acknowledge that he believes that DACA is unconstitutional. And so we're hoping to get that final order here again soon.
Why did he do that? Because he's got his fraternity brother judge from the other part of the country that says, no, you got to put it back in place. Because I know that happens. Judges don't like to poke each other in the eye, even from hundreds of miles away. Attorneys, the same thing. You got kind of a club there, and you've got one judge saying, "Oh no, you got to start the program back up." And then you've got the other one in Texas who's like, no, this is unconstitutional. You can't do it like this.
Right. So I think, in recognizing how you feel about federal judges, I'll say this in his defense. A preliminary injunction means that you are dealing with a crisis situation that has just developed. And basically what he said was, look, DACA's been around for about 5 years, guys. If this was such a crisis right now, although I get your constitutional argument in granting this temporary injunction, then you probably should have filed it sooner. So I think that's where
somebody said, you had your hand up in the back and say, well, we thought people would figure it out from DAPA, whatever the other one. We figured that was the same thing, Judge. I mean, we can't help that.
And he's the same judge.
Brain damaged people in Washington, D.C.
And he is the same judge that granted DAPA. But I do think we still feel confident about it. And
so he's like, let's don't put on the brakes and make everybody's head hit the windshield. Because I like he's one of the few I'm agreeing with.
Right.
So put a little brakes.
I think in wonderful Scott Beason legalese, that is exactly the way to be able to say it. Big Dave, I think he did it well, is what I would say. Is the way
you don't work with him though.
It is my job to make the complicated understandable.
And it made sense. It made sense. But good judge. We feel good about our case.
Good deal. So what about the? I want to ask you also about the counting illegal immigrants in the census, which is going to stick it to us. I saw that Mo Brooks came out and
he did
joined in the position that we've had here for a long time, and y'all have, and
yeah, really.
I'm taking credit for that mostly
you
because
should.
I had it before you were in office.
That's
so
okay.
It counts. It goes from here, Scott Beason Radio, to you, to Mo Brooks, and it's making the rounds nationally.
And we'll give it the Beason touch when we finally get a chance to argue that at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes, you'll use slang words.
Yeah, the status of that case, just so folks will know, is Department of Justice requested some additional time to file an answer. They can do a couple of things when they file that answer. They can wholeheartedly agree with us, similar to how the Department of Justice responded on DACA, to be able to say that they believe it's unconstitutional. They could potentially, though, challenge us on a legal concept called standing. In essence, saying, you've not been harmed yet, so let's let it play out and see what happens.
But if you get harmed yet, you go to a judge and he says, well, if it was a problem, you should have told us ahead of time.
Exactly.
Oh, y'all are driving me crazy. I do not know how attorneys do it, but I'm glad you're doing the job. You got time to stay with us for a few more minutes, right?
I do, yes.
First quarter down, Scott Beason Radio. Steve Marshall, the Attorney General of the United States. These United States is on the program. We're going to follow up with, he actually talked to Jeff Sessions, so Jeff Sessions is doing stuff, which some of my listeners will be glad to hear. We will be right back.